Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Free Press Live. I am your host, Michael Moynihan. We are back again. We took a little bit of a break from this studio and from our home studios to be at the DNC. If you didn't watch that, it was a raucous, fun, good time. And I did that with my favorite person, my co-host, my partner in punditry, the opinion editor for Newsweek, Batya Ungar-Sargon. And joining us also today, editor-at-large of County Highway, and I have to interject, I've done it before, get it, it's such a good newspaper, print only, the co-host of America This Week, Walter Kern, and joining us again, one of my favorite people in the world, Free Press reporter Eli Lake. Welcome all. Guys, today we have a lot to cover because there's a lot in the news. Donald Trump has, changed his mind on something rather important that we'll get into that on Lex Friedman's podcast. Brazil decided that it was a smart thing to ban X and to attack Elon Musk's company Starlink too. We'll get to what that means for free speech. In a more depressing note, the murder of 6 hostages, including the American Hirsch Goldberg Polin in Gaza. And how is Israel and how are the U.S. going to respond to this? And finally, a prominent right-wing media organization that has a lot of people you've probably heard of on their payroll has been revealed, according to the DOJ. We get a little, DOJ stuff with Russia, maybe a Russian influence operation. We'll figure out if that's indeed what it is. Batya, what's going on, Batya? Donald Trump.
Yes, indeed. Donald Trump has changed his mind about something very, very important. So since the 2020 election, former President Donald Trump has insisted that he won and that the election was rigged and stolen. He said repeatedly that Joe Biden and the Democrats cheated and that there was fraud and other irregularities that accounted for the results. But lately, Trump has been telling a different story about 2020. Listen to what he had to say on Lex Friedman's show this week.
Done well with debates. I mean, I became president. Then the second time I got millions more votes than I got the first time. So I was told if I got 63 million, which is what I got the first time, you would win. You can't not win. And I got millions of more votes than that and lost by a whisker.
Notice how he paused before saying it. And this wasn't a one-off. Trump also said that he lost at a Moms for Liberty event. Let's watch that as well.
12 million votes more than that, more than anybody had ever got. We got the most votes of anybody, of any sitting president in history. And he beat us by a whisker. And it was a terrible thing. They used COVID
beat us by a whisker again. Now, not everybody is happy about this. The famous white supremacist and backer of the Stop the Steal movement, Nick Fuentes, is very, very angry at Trump. Let's watch that.
Admitting, he says, oh, I lost by a whisker. So what was the point? Like, what's the point of any of it? You lost in 2020? Seriously? I mean, what are we even doing anymore? Then you're a loser. Then you're a loser. You just lost. Then you lost to Joe Biden. You deserve to be charged. If he admits that he lost, then that actually vindicates the DOJ charge against him.
Okay, so Walter, here's my theory about why Trump is choosing this moment to kind of do this 180 on 2020. And I'm very curious if you agree with me. I think there are 2 things happening here. The first is, I've been saying all election cycle, if you look just at policy, Trump is dead center. He's really representing where 60% of Americans are at. If you look at the polls on major, major issues from abortion to immigration to trade to foreign policy. And I think he's sort of sick of being seen as an extremist and trying to kind of symbolically reclaim that, or rhetorically lay claim to where he's actually at in terms of policy. And I think the second thing that's happening here is he ran the first and the second time kind of as an insurgent. I mean, even though he was an incumbent in 2020, he was still running as this kind of outsider to the establishment. But now, having so thoroughly recreated the GOP in his image, that's a very uncomfortable position for him now. And I think he's sort of gesturing towards what Donald Trump, the establishment character, would look like, to turn that into an election strength. And that's what we're seeing here in this reversal. What do you think I'm right? What do you make of why he chose this moment to admit that he lost in 2020?
Well, part of the evidence for you being right is that Nick Fuentes blew a gasket over it. I think the Nick Fuenteses of the world are people that Trump would like to leave behind and firmly disassociate himself from. But I think there could be another reason, and this is all, criminology and speculation. But beside that move to the center that you mentioned, which I think is legitimate, he's obviously trying to build a coalition across traditional Democratic lines. He's seeming more and more like a centrist Democrat from my youth, frankly. I think he may want to signal people that voting matters, because to a certain faction that has backed him, it's just going to be another steal. It's just going to be another fraud. Why even bother to go vote? And I think he's suggesting that there is a possibility of an honest election, and that American elections are not absolutely corrupt, and there's reason to go out there and do it, not just sit back and be cynical.
I think, Eli, there's something really interesting happening as well, which is we did a live after the Kamala Harris interview. And one of the things that we all noted was not only did she refuse the bait to sort of talk about herself as the first Black woman, but she also stopped talking about Donald Trump as this great threat to democracy. And I think it's so interesting that at the exact moment that the Democrats have finally abandoned that sort of nonsensical hyperbole, Donald Trump has also sort of decided to accept sort of the democratic process, even one that he lost in 2020. What do you make of that?
I think it's a really great observation, but I think the big news here, Batya, is that Trump just threw away the white supremacist incel vote. Anyway, I joked. But, on this point, I almost want to, I'm just so used to Trump zigzagging all the time. I wonder how long he's going to stick to this. And I also wonder if, Kamala, or at least the Democrats, are going to say, listen, they have been building a messaging campaign for all of Biden's presidency that, Biden or I guess now Kamala is the only thing standing between, democracy and tyranny. So in that respect, I just think it's so ingrained, especially among the party strategists and the operatives and the people who do the sort of the work of trying to persuade voters to vote for them, that I'm not ready yet to say they've given that up, because that is just so much a huge part of their messaging. It's so ingrained in how they think about it. This is a whole community of people.
Michael, do you agree that both sides in this moment really do seem to be marginalizing their extremities? You're seeing this in the Democratic Party as well, with Harris in some ways making a play for the center, trying to portray herself as being very pro-business is the latest thing that we've been hearing, pro-small business, and giving up on the identity politics extremism and really trying to recover the center. Are both parties marginalizing their extremes in a way that we should all support?
They're trying to. That's, you and I, Batya, were in Chicago at the DNC, and it was a pretty stark contrast when you're, snaking your way through these people with keffiyehs wrapped around their face, burning the one American flag that I saw outside was on fire. And there were a lot of Hezbollah flags and Palestinian flags and things like that. And then you go inside and it was, patriotism. They were handing out, I went in, somebody tried to give me a thing that just said USA on it. And I'm like, where am I? And then you think back to Kamala, obviously in 2020. And this is, of course, one of the reasons that you don't give many interviews, and the ones that you do are kind of patty cake with Dana Bash, is that I would love for someone to just go through those positions, because you say, on identity politics, maybe defund the police kind of stuff, which is really not popular with anyone and never was, is to go back and say at 2020, okay, so what happened to that person? Because the argument that I heard that evening on CNN, and we did a live stream that everyone should go back and watch from that interview, they were saying, well, she was a hard-nosed prosecutor. She was a, conservative Democrat. She's law and order. And then she faked it to be very, very progressive in 2020 when that's what the culture demanded. And then she lurched back to who she really is now. And, I think that let's pretend that we believe that for a second. It's also pretty interesting that you could make that case about Donald Trump, somebody who was born in Queens and grew up in Manhattan and, is talking to a journalist about abortion in Florida and annoying a certain part of his base. But I think that, the Nick Fuentes thing is actually interesting. And the reason to put a joker like that on screen is that they seem upset with him because that he acknowledged that the election was not stolen. And by the way, it reminded me of the last concert the Sex Pistols ever gave in 1978 at the Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco, when Johnny Rotten says, "Do you ever get the feeling you've been cheated?" And that's what he felt like, I've been cheated by this man. It's like, well, I talked to somebody today, a historian today, who said, Donald Trump was the best president for Israel and blah, blah, blah. And he enumerates this case. It's like, these guys have been making Donald Trump into who they want him to be. And once in a while, there's this reality check that he is not the guy that Nick Fuentes wants him to be. He is probably, more of somebody in the center. I probably disagree with you a little bit on that, Batya, but I think that instinct is right. I agree with you that his instincts are probably a little more Manhattan than they are, sort of Arkansas or something.
Can I add one thing? I think that most things that happen in an election at this point can be resolved by asking who's winning and who's losing.
Yeah.
And who perceives themselves to be moving to victory and who doesn't. I think Trump thinks he's winning. My reporting suggests that he does. And so he can afford to move out into a broader group of people. I think she's afraid, and I think her big bounce never happened. And frankly, I think her polls have been a little bit rosy. And she's trying to gain traction with a broader group too. In other words, Trump is trying to run the table and she's trying to broaden out from her base.
That's really well put. I'm wondering, Eli, how much of a problem for Trump is his far right flank? I mean, does the stench of Nick Fuentes, even when Nick Fuentes is angry at you, linger? I mean, how much should Trump worry about that? Why don't we end the topic with that?
He went to Mar-a-Lago with Kanye West, but other than that, I don't think Trump has really done anything to necessarily ingratiate himself. We can relitigate, but the Charlottesville, his remarks about it's all wrong. You could argue with the tone of it, but he did not raise the take back the right or whatever they are. So I think it's always been that the left and the Democrats have wanted to run against an open race. They want him to be George Wallace, and they got painting like people like Mitt Romney as like that. So here's Trump giving him plenty of ammunition in 2016 presidency, and it became a kind of mantra, but it wasn't true. And so shame on, I guess, like Nick being utterly loathsome and terrible is also a moron because he fell for their spin.